Good morning, everyone. Good morning from here on the West Coast, and good afternoon to everyone joining us out east. My name is Alex Stabler, and I'm the chair of the Los Angeles chapter of IPF Atid, the young professional arm of Israel Policy Forum. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. If you're new to Israel Policy Forum or IPF Atid, I want to welcome you. Israel Policy Forum is an organization committed to building support for a sustainable two-state solution, meaning a Jewish, democratic, and secure Israel alongside a viable, independent Palestinian state. We do this through outreach in the American Jewish community, through policymakers in Washington, and through IPF Atid young leaders. If uncertainty and complexity can characterize these historic moments we find ourselves in, and what the years to come may bring as a result of today's actions, our future Israel aims to, you guys, excuse me, let me backtrack really quickly. Keep going. If uncertainty and complexity can characterize these historic moments we find ourselves in, and what the years to come may bring as a result of today's actions, our future Israel aims to raise the millennial voice and work towards a positive vision for this future. With annexation or declaring sovereignty of the West Bank facing a July 1st date to move towards the Knesset with US coordination, we unite in our calls for responsible leadership, and we're going on the record to oppose annexation. As I introduce friends of IPF Atid and guest speakers, I ask that each of you join us in the weeks to come in taking one action, whether big or small, on social media or offline, in front of the camera or not, to join our future Israel, which we'll be talking about soon. We're incredibly fortunate to be joined today by Stav Shaffir, one of Israel's most active voices for progress on social issues, Zionism, and much more. She rose to fame through her leadership in Israel's 2011 justice protests and became the Knesset's youngest female politician at 27, where she quickly became known for placing a spotlight on important issues of accountability and national importance. I cannot think of a better guest to join our group today at such a historic moment, not just for our issue, but for our country and the world. I'm also incredibly happy to turn this over to my friend and partner in this work, Brianna Goodlin, who is the founding chair of IPF Atid's Boston chapter. Brianna is an innovation and change consultant in the private sector, and I'm proud to call her my friend. Brianna will help us lead and break off today's program flow. Brianna, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex, and welcome everybody. My name's Brianna. As Alex said, I am the founding chair of the Boston chapter, but I've been involved with IPF Atid for a while, since its inception in 2017, both through the Chicago chapter as a Bronfman convener, as well as a delegate to the trip to Israel and the Palestinian territories last year. So a very deep expertise within Israel Policy Forum Atid, and happy to be here and introduce Stav. Just as a run of show, Stav is going to speak for a few minutes and I'll ask a question, and then we're actually going to bring all of you into the discussion through interactive breakouts, and then we'll return as a group. So Stav, we've spoken enough already about the moment we're in, but I'd love to hear from you and what you'd like to share with our group and what our future Israel means to you. You're muted, Stav.
Hello?
Yes, there we go.
So hello, I'm very, very happy to be here with you. Although I need to imagine some of you at the moment. It's and it's very important because this is a really important moment that I think takes more than it takes just a security and explanation. It takes a political explanation, which also explains the reason for why we Israelis and Americans have to work together in order to prevent and stop this annexation plan. So I am Stav. I've just finished my fourth term in Parliament after 7 years that I was in Parliament, from 9 years since the protest movement in 2011, that for us Israelis changed a lot, mainly in the sense that we felt for the first time that we have power as citizens, that if we gather together and we fight for our rights, it can work and it can change the way that our country works. However, change takes a long time. And as we saw that change coming with the discourse on how socio-economic issues discourse was changed in the 2011 protest, one thing did not change, and that's the Prime Minister. Not only that it did not change, it actually made Netanyahu, who thought the 2011 protest was the worst thing that happened to his career, it made him recalculate his way. And from 2011 and on, we see more and more steps that Netanyahu's government is taking that are damaging Israeli democracy. Or in a way, we can put it just before we got on this call, I was asked whether I went to the protest that last Saturday, and my response was, which protest? We had so many. So yes, we have a lot of protests here about many, many issues, but I think citizens feel less and less powerful. And that's also related to the annexation plan. If you ask Israelis what they feel about annexation, the majority of Israelis would say, I disagree with that. If you ask Israelis if they want a two-state solution, you would discover that we still have a 65% majority for a two-state solution. And that's after 40 years of right-wing governments, almost 40 years straight, and a lot of government investment in the settlement project. The reason we still have these very high numbers for a two-state solution is because for most Israelis, the settlement project never became part of mainstream thinking. Most Israelis did not even travel to the West Bank, or if they did, they went there during their military service, but not on a regular basis. Most Israelis, although they had fear and complain about the Oslo agreements, see them today as something that is almost taken for granted and a necessary step for our security. For most Israelis, if you ask them if they want to have now 2.5 million Palestinians as part of Israel without rights, they would say no. And if you ask if they want them to be part of Israel with democratic rights, they would be a little bit afraid, because that means a Palestinian majority and the end of Zionism. So for the majority of Israelis, annexation is not a plan.
Oh my God, I'm on.
The reason the annexation plan exists is political. The settlement project, although not being a very successful project, and I'll give you a short explanation for why it's not successful, was not successful on the ground, but was very successful politically. It became a very strong political power within our government. Why has it not been successful on the ground? Because the settlers 40 years ago wanted two goals mainly. One goal was to settle in the territory in a sustainable way that would make the settlement project something that is inseparable from Israel. On that end, if you check the numbers today, you see that the settlement project is completely unsustainable. 90% of settlers work either inside Israel or in municipal and governmental jobs. There is hardly any agriculture or industry success in the project, and most of its budget comes from the Israeli state budget or from their allies in the US, the evangelical community and some other very strong allies that they have. The second goal of the settlement project was to settle in the hearts. That's what they call it in Hebrew, להתנחל בלבבות, which basically means to become mainstream in Israeli society. This did not work as well. They never became the mainstream and always remained a minority in the Israeli political arena, but a very strong one, because they became the strongest power on Netanyahu and his government. And that's the place where we have to change the way that it works. Today, what we see is a collaboration of extremists. We see it not only in Israel or in the US. We see how right-wing leaders from all around the world who use populism and fake news and dismiss the sense of truth and honesty in politics, how all of them collaborate together. They help each other politically, they collaborate with resources, they contribute together to each other's political needs and not to their own countries. The question that we need to ask ourselves is what happens on the other side, on our side? How come there is no strong progressive alliance, strong democratic alliance between people who believe in the same cause, in making peace and ending the conflict in a two-state solution when it comes to Israel-Palestine, and also in other shared causes like dealing with climate change responsibly, like working for a better economy that serves the human being and not just the interests of big companies. Why are we not all working together in order to achieve all of these goals? And especially today, I mean, we all see, because we're still within the COVID crisis, we see how the COVID crisis created, especially when it comes to healthcare, a huge global collaboration around trying to deal with it and finding a vaccine and a cure. The same kind of collaboration is needed today on the biggest problems that the world has. And that's the kind of collaboration that we need today in order to stop the biggest threat on Zionism, which is the annexation plan and what will come afterwards. So on that note, we can continue for some more questions. I would just say that for me, the collaboration with the IPF, and especially with the young generation of the IPF, is so important, especially because of that, because you are our partners in order to try to win in this so incredibly important fight. And I feel we have to do it together, and that's exactly the kind of work that I know that you're working on right now. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Stav. That's perfect. And I think collaboration is exactly the theme of not only our mobilization campaign, but of this call as well. And so that leads into my first question, in that what is it that American Jews can do to raise our voice on annexation? What would you recommend?
Well, so today the annexation plan is only happening because of Netanyahu and Trump's collaboration. And this happens against the will of most Israelis. You elected, or maybe not you specifically, but your country elected President Trump, and you definitely have a way to influence and use this political power in order to change the current goal. I think that the more Americans understand that this is actually a risk to Israel, the immediate results of an annexation will first of all might be the collapse of the Palestinian Authority, with whom, although the government doesn't want to admit it regularly, but the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority has very close security collaboration throughout the years that prevents a lot of terrorism. That's a kind of collaboration that we would like to keep. That's why the vast majority of Israeli security persona are against the annexation. The other risk is the collapse of the Israel-Jordan peace agreement that, of course, is another huge threat to Israel's security. And that's before I'm even starting to ask the big questions on whether the Palestinians who are within the territory will hold Israeli citizenship or will not hold an Israeli citizenship, which will make us an apartheid state, which is something that, again, most Israelis do not want to be. That's the vast majority of Israelis, both left and right. So that's Israel. And it's very important that in the US, people will know that, will know the actual numbers, will understand the risk. I have to tell you, I think a lot of Israelis do not understand the risk as well, because our media doesn't do its job in explaining what the annexation actually means. The discourse after 3 election rounds and a year and a half of political chaos, the discourse is only around politics right now. And the media was heavily threatened by the government. Only yesterday, the Likud party published an ad saying that a journalist who exposed corruption should go to jail. That's the kind of political talk that we're hearing. So the other part that US citizens should know is the amount of money that goes from the US into the settlement project. And that's another thing that you should be aware of. The settlement project, its publicity, its political strength, it's funded by Israeli taxpayers without them knowing. A lot of my work in parliament was to expose the corrupt way of moving our tax money instead of into social services, moving them into settlement funding. The reason the government does it like under the table without transparency is because they know that most Israelis will not agree to it. So the government is doing something that is in complete disagreement of the Israeli public. And that's why they're doing it secretly. It's very important to understand where the money is going and how much American money is going into that project as well, instead of helping Israel. And the other part that I think is important to mention is about BDS initiatives and such. They are helpful only to the Israeli right. They're hurting and damaging the Israeli left all the time, and are actually not preventing, but slowing down our ability to end the conflict. The reason that it happens is because the Israeli right is using every BDS initiative in order to talk to their voters and say, oh, you see, the world is against us, and therefore we could never really trust the international support, not on security and not on any other issue, and therefore a solution is impossible. And actually that fear moves more and more voters to the right. The other part of it that is damaging to the left is the disconnection. We need your help. We need a stronger connection and collaboration in order to fight for peace. And it needs to be a collaboration over resources and over echoing this message, and in a way dealing with one of our biggest problems today, which is that the media is not telling Israelis exactly what annexation might lead to. They don't understand the consequences. And we need help in doing that. So more collaboration is the way to achieve it, and never less collaboration. And I think in terms of, and this doesn't only come to the conflict. The conflict is the #1 most urgent cause in Israel's interest right now, to end the conflict and reach a two-state solution, have a normal and clear border between us and the Palestinians, with free people in two democratic countries side by side. That's the most urgent cause. But we have many other causes that we need to work on together. And with Israel, that's supposed to be the capital of Jewish life, when I see the distancing of the younger communities within the Jewish community in the US, the distancing from Israel, I feel ashamed, because I know that our future strategically and also morally should be together, and with a mutual discussion all the time over the kind of future that we see.
So that's great, because that brings me to another question that I had, is that how do we create sustainable dialogue and conversations with millennial Israelis to ensure that this partnership does continue long-term?
Okay, you should tell me. What do you think is the best way?
I think we're supposed to do it together, so you go first and then I'll share my thoughts.
Well, I think, first of all, it needs to be direct. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have enough, we have a strong enough platform right now to do this directly. And actually the fact that we can now we all get used to Zooming, actually can make it easier. But we need to do it over issues that are important to young people. A lot of the discourse is becoming very old in ideas, not in people, but the ideas are the same ideas that have been discussed for so many years. When it comes to millennials and to the younger generation, we need to bring forward our ideas. We have a lot to teach each other. There are great things in Israel, in Israel's DNA, that are now becoming very popular in the US. I'm looking at the healthcare discussion. In Israel, when you ask people, just go to ask anyone on the street, would you like to spend a little bit more money from your tax money in order to have a national healthcare system, a public healthcare system? 92% of Israelis would immediately say yes. 92%. And really, I never met the other 8%. I don't know who they are, but that's the numbers that I see in every poll. So most Israelis, for us, national healthcare system is a given. It's something that we have from the beginning of Israel. It's now growing support also in the US is really exciting. And I think that in the same way, there are many things that we can learn from the US. Having a constitution, for one, and a stronger, although I would not want this specific government to write the constitution. So this
we don't either, so we feel
we'll have to wait with it for a few years, but having a constitution, the amount and still the freedom of the media. I know that you probably have a lot of complaints, but living in a small country with only a few media outlets, because there are not enough Hebrew speakers, sadly, allowed the government to control, not directly, but control with fear and with regulation threats, a lot of our media outlets. And this is risking democracy, and we feel it very much right now. And I have to tell you, when I went, after the protest movement, when we mobilized about 1 million citizens to the streets to protest, when I needed to learn how to organize people and to take this mobilizing into real political organizing, I went to the States to learn how the progressive movement and the Jewish movement and civil rights movement did it in the States in order to come and bring it back here. So there are a lot of ideas that we should always share, especially when it comes to how we see our future. And we need to do this talking about the needs and the interests of the young generation that suffers from the very same things globally and from the mistakes of our parents' generation that we're here to deal with. And we need to create better and more direct ways of doing it and not be afraid of criticism, knowing that, yes, this is a really difficult time. All of us are now suffer from political populism and leaders who use their power against the interests of the people and for their own good. And this is not just us, it happens in many, many other ways. But if we want, the answer to that is not to become cynical or apathetic towards it. Exactly the opposite. It's to become more active. It's to go out to the street and protest. It's to organize politically and win elections. It's to do everything that we can in order to take responsibility. And whenever you need a little bit of inspiration on how to make it happen, just think about what has already been achieved. I mean, I live here in Tel Aviv. Israel could not be, if not the courage of many people who decided that they're going to achieve the impossible and make Israel exist, our grandparents' generation. And we achieved throughout the years so many great things, including 2 peace agreements with 2 really big past enemies of Israel. Before the agreement with Egypt, who would have thought that this could happen? People were in a complete despair and cynicism towards it. But it happens because that's what human initiative and compromise and courage can reach. And we need to take the same principles and with the huge advantages that our generation has as a generation that is so creative and that was born into a new technological age of freedom of ideas and of information. We have to use all of these connections in order to achieve even greater goals.
So it sounds like the key to collaboration is looking beyond the usual suspects in terms of issues that we collaborate on, but actually expanding the issues and everything that we engage on. So I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan. I know he's going to jump in.
Hi, everyone. Stav, I think that was excellent. We launched Our Future Israel as basically a pathway to really revamp these conversations and to be a platform for how do we collaborate with Israelis like you and make sure that we have these conversations and we're having this dialogue so we can move to action. And I think, Our Future Israel is so powerful because we know as young American Jews that, our future in our country and our future, Jewish future is tied to Israel, and that Israel's future is tied to the diaspora and Jews that live outside of Israel. So we're really excited to launch this campaign and start partnering with organizations in Israel that share our values and share our goal for a secure and Jewish democratic state. So we're having a little bit of technical difficulties on our end. We were going to go to breakout rooms, but what we've decided instead is to allow everyone, if you have comments and you'd like to share, we're going to change to a panel view. So if you raise your hand at the bottom of the screen, your camera will be turned on and you'll be able to share your thoughts on what you think, what Our Future Israel, this campaign means to you, your thoughts in this moment regarding annexation, and then any questions you have or question you have for Stav. I would like to say make sure to keep your remarks fairly short, because we do have 91 people on this Zoom, and we'd like as many people to participate as possible. So Adam, I'm going to let you turn it over to the first couple of Atidniks who want to join the conversation. Or Shani, whoever it is.
I know that Adam's working right now to promote a couple of our Atid leaders to panelists. And in the meantime, I see a question from Jason.
We have Yuval.
Hi, Yuval. I'm going to allow Jason, a friend of ours from San Diego, to talk and ask his question. We should be able to hear you. Yep.
Oh, good. So first of all, this is awesome. Thanks for convening it. I'll be brief. So I would love to hear more. I think as an American Jew looking to support Israel, one of the difficulties, especially right now, is just the depletion of any alternative to Bibi Netanyahu. He seems to have mastered the art of eliminating from the equation anybody who even comes close to him in the elections. So I'm just wondering, what do we do? Like, it's hard to support something when you don't have an option. Like, what is the option for American Jews to support right now? Ultimately, it's all going to come down to politics, and if you can't win elections, we can't make change. So, like, what do we do? Who are we supposed to support?
Yeah, well, that's the question that we ask ourselves as well. We are in a situation that we never imagined. I never imagined that would happen. Actually, the reason I'm not in politics in parliament today is because I decided to give up my own seat in the last elections we had this year in order to push for a unity between all the center-left parties, which I thought was a necessity if we wanted to win elections. And those elections seemed to me like the most important ones to Israel. We knew that losing these elections mean that our democracy will be at great threat. So imagine my response when I saw that Gantz, after getting a majority, decided to give up and join the most corrupt government we've ever had. It's of course something I could never imagine that could have happened. And now, reality is that our parliament is very weak. It's no longer an actual parliament in the way that you imagine parliamentary discussions and responsibilities. Our media is very weak, as I said a few times. And we feel how, democracy is not something that, it doesn't make a very strong sound when it disappears. It doesn't just happen one day that you can say, that was the day when we lost our democracy. It's actually a really, really long process. And it happens so slowly that sometimes you just don't understand what was the point of no return. We are in this process right now. Our democracy is no longer a strong liberal democracy. It's something that's like going there in the middle. And we have to think about new ways of doing that. So my way of doing it now is to create a movement from outside of politics. I'm now the chair of the Green Party in Israel. And we talk especially to younger people about how politics can actually be a good place when you do things for your country and not for your own interests. So we're trying to create a better image of politics that's based on a vision and not of what they see in parliament today and of what they see in the news. Part of what we're going to do is to create a new media outlet in order to spread these ideas and create other channels that are not through what we're used to in order to create this discourse with the younger generation. We could really use your help in doing that. And yes, it doesn't mean, at the moment, it doesn't mean to support a candidate, because you're very much right. The Israeli left is in its worst shape ever. But we need to build a future of politics. So at the moment, we need to build a way of resistance and of pushing this government to probably not to do the right things, but to not do the really terrible things. Like, at the moment, there are a lot of fights over the COVID rules. They try to legislate through using the COVID crisis. They try to create a legislation that would damage severely human rights, civil rights in Israel for all Israelis. So that's one of the biggest protests that we're having now. The other big protest is about the annexation plan. So yes, we have to be very, very active and constantly show the power of the people in front of the power of politicians. But the more that we find ways and we find the most creative ways to continue and give people power to protest and to prevent apathy from dominating public life, that's our way to win. The more ways that we create to communicate with the public, I don't need to tell you the disadvantages and the advantages of social media right now, but we need to go around it and use it for our own needs at the moment. The better we access people's minds and able to convince them to join us. So it's really about building the longer term plan at the moment and waiting for the right moment, to change what's happening in the political structure as well.
Rachel, I know you had a question. Do you want to unmute yourself? I just promoted you to panelist.
Sure. First of all, hi. Thank you so much for organizing this great event today. My name is Rachael Wallace. I'm involved with IPF Atid in Los Angeles, and I'm also chairing IPF Atid's Women, Peace, and Security channel. So I know you were just talking a little bit about Knesset, Parliament. So the question I had is, it's my understanding that Oded Former from Yisrael Beitenu was recently selected to head the Committee on Women and Gender Equality. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to that appointment, what the motivation was behind that, and also the number of women in Knesset has been decreasing. So I'm curious also what your thoughts are on how we can increase that number, as well as general women in the foreign policy field in Israel.
Yeah, that's a big question. A few months ago, I had a discussion with a political reporter on stage who asked me, why are there no women in parliament talking about security? So I reminded to her that just a few days before that interview, there was a panel on her TV channel about security, to which they invited 6 men to talk. And she said immediately, well, yeah, but they were from the security field. No, they weren't. And what I told her was that when I joined parliament, the first thing that I did, because my security understanding was based on a lot of reading and curiosity and my 2 years in the army, but that's definitely not enough. So the first thing that I did as a member of parliament was to go to the INSS, which is an Israeli think tank for security, and ask them to give me a guidance, like on a weekly basis to learn security. So I went and spent like a year studying security in order to be able to speak about it in the best way that I can. But nobody on the television cared whether I or another member of parliament, what kind of learning we did. They preferred to invite the men. So that's a bias that we have to deal with, helping each other, which basically means that people, not just women, people who go on a panel on television and see that there are not enough women on the panel, not just one, but not enough. One out of 4 is not enough, to just not participate. That's public pressure. By the way, the same thing should do about other populations in Israel. There is a very low representation of Israeli Arabs on television. There is very low representation of Israeli ultra-Orthodox on television. We need to create more and more representation of the different Israeli society by pushing for that and helping each other to do that. And of course, a lot of, by the way, we talked about the settlers movement. They did that to the media. Every time they saw, they're still doing it. Every time they see a left-wing person, journalist or a politician sitting in the news panel, they send dozens and dozens of letters and emails to the TV channel saying, why do you give so much time, so much airtime to that leftist? So they just create pressure that is completely disproportionate to their amount in society. But they create that pressure and they create more political power for themselves in the media as well. That's one way. As for Oded Forer, yeah, so the only man in the women committee is the chair of the committee, which is a bit strange. I have to tell you though that I would prefer the discussion to be over why is there no woman chairing the security committee of parliament or the finance committee of parliament, which no woman has ever chaired. That's, I think, it's much more important discussion than why a man chairing the women community. Of course, it's not the best. It happens because of the size of the parties. The party that has the bigger party gets to pick their committees in parliament. And actually, the government changed the way parliament works by denying the opposition from getting most of the parliamentary committees. That's another damage to democracy that we're seeing. The Women Parliamentary Committee is a relatively weak committee, and that's why it went to the opposition. And to be honest, if we could make every man in parliament sit in a committee that is full with just women, I wouldn't completely oppose that. I think that could be a really interesting experiment. So we'll see what Oded Forer is going to learn from that experience.
Be a great learning experience. Do we have another panelist ask a question?
Yeah, I think Oren was going to go next.
Yeah, hi Stav, hi Jonathan, Brianna, Shani, thanks for putting this together. My question's a little bit more long-term in nature. It's not going to solve anything in the next 60 days, but what I'm curious about is if there's any organization or a collaboration of organizations who are working on developing the infrastructure, the long-term infrastructure necessary to rebuild the political left in Israel, with an emphasis on training activists, organizers, influencers to coordinate together both in their local communities and across the country to sort of rebuild from the ground up, so to speak, and whether or not there's anything coordinated like that happening.
Yeah, so thank you. That's a really good question. There's a bunch of organizations doing that. They always meet the same problems. One is money. Most of the left-wing organizations spend too much time fighting against each other over resources. And the amount of investment in each one of them is actually very small, and that's always a problem. So if you look at one of the right wing placed a really strong political infrastructure, think tanks, media, they took over some of the media channels and newspapers. Two out of three corruption allegations, the corruption allegations against Bibi are about his attempt to take over the media and control it. That was its biggest focus was to take over the media and to remove, and that's what it does very well, to remove and destroy every opponent that he has. And you see the results of that. That's his focus. So the right wing, for example, builds one really big think tank that I think of is, it's called the Kohelet Forum, and it's by Keren Tikva. And they, for example, have a whole, like, dozens of employees and researchers and people who work on right-wing legislation agenda and influencing the media, and with a lot of budget, with millions and millions of dollars going into that organization in order to change. They sat in some of the most important ministries of the right-wing politicians and really created the agenda for them. On the left, you see a bunch of organizations who are undecided whether they're left or center, and are really afraid to be called left, or are really afraid to be identified with the opposition, so they constantly try to balance and be identified with the coalition as well. And those who are actually doing the job don't have enough money to employ so many people, so they're constantly behind. So that's one thing that we see. About organizing itself. So again, there are organizing organizations. They're not, most of them are not identified today very much with the left. There are a few that are becoming to rise. There is, for example, one Jewish and Arab organization called Umdim Beyachad, Standing Together, that is doing exactly that, organizing for change, and it's doing it beautifully. And a bunch of others are trying to do something similar, but it's not strong enough. And another problem of that is the collaboration with politicians. There is a lot of fear because of the V15 laws. I don't know if you're aware of that, but a few laws that the government passed in order to limit the left from operating. A lot of NGOs are really afraid to work with politicians. So instead of strengthening the whole system and building people into politics and strengthening the political the political agenda of these organizations, they're actually distancing from there. So that's another problem. And the attacks on all of these NGOs are always very similar. It's the government just picks one successful NGO. For example, if I'll give you the protest on Saturday as an example. So there was a really big protest against the annexation, and it was beautiful. There were Jews and Arabs standing together, trying to fight together in order to put pressure on the government. The government took a picture of one Palestinian flag that was in the protest, and they made the entire news channels cover the protest only within that question on whether it was okay or not that the protesters brought a Palestinian flag. And that was the discourse. Instead of having a discourse on annexation and what it means, the discourse was about that flag. So every time the right wing picks one thing or one way of damaging or putting a suspicion over the actual goals of the protesters, and by that changing completely the discussion. And they do it using all of their media power. So part of what we need to do, and some of our focus must be the media itself and how we build better ways to communicate with the public and deliver that information. Because my worry is that most Israelis today don't know what the Trump deal is going to do. And that's a really big problem.
Jonathan?
I think Rachael Goldberg is next.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I actually had the same question as Rachael Wallace, but since you called on me, I actually was curious a little bit more about the media aspect, and it could be because we're dealing with a lot of the same issues within the US, but I am curious if there are any discussions about if there needs to be some sort of legal route to provide better protections for media and maybe even for NGOs, or if there's some other, I guess, concentrated process that's being considered to try to make it easier to, I guess, help the industries that are currently being targeted by Netanyahu to try to control the narrative. And if there's a way to maybe, I guess, at least neutralize the narrative rather than have it pulled to one side. Apologies, I'm switching to migraine. Sorry? Sorry if that was convoluted.
I think it's a really good question that I'm asking myself a lot. Because especially in the way that the Israeli media works, because it's so small, so in a way it's more limited. The competition within the media is very small as well. And it's very easy for, media and money always went together, but it's very easy for those who have the money to control the media. And in Israel, those who hold the regulation to put another threat on the media, like Bibi did with the TV channels and with the other newspapers. our other problem is social media, and the fact that today the right wing in Israel is controlling the discourse on social media as well. And here there is a problem that is inherent to to fights on democracy. The times when democracy is being threatened is that when one political entity, a populist political entity, wants to win no matter what and give up on every red line. So for democracy to exist, you need that the two parties will respect the rules of democracy, right? And when one party says, all I care is winning, and if I don't win, so I don't want the democracy, so it's okay to break the rules, then we're in a problem. And for the left, that was always a problem, because the things that are done by the right in Israel are against our morals, against our red lines, and we're not using the same tactics. And so we need to be much more creative and much stronger over time. When it comes to social media, we need to operate, it's not just a matter of money, it's also a matter of money, but we also need to operate stronger organized groups in order to spread information. We need to go back to some of the old ways, actually, which is to go to every street in the country and talk to people. But sadly, that's not influential enough. It's not like, eventually, I as a politician did and still do a lot of public talks around the country. But still, when people get most of their information from television, you need to be with them in ongoing touch, in ongoing contact, in order to keep the information in their minds. And for that, we need to create new ways of doing. We also need to influence the media in the ways that I told you earlier that the settlers, for example, did, by putting constant pressure on creating better balance of political opinions and of giving better information. Some of the biggest problem is that information is not reaching the audience. And people just hear the fake news instead of getting the real news. And another one of the things, the platforms that I'm building now is a real news platform that's supposed to deliver the accurate information especially to teenagers, because what they see on most of the news is fake. And of course, we need to empower the courageous journalists. We have a lot of courageous journalists that are now just under attack. Those who expose corruption, those who dare tell the truth in political panels and fight for what they see as the truth. We have many of them, and they are under threat of getting fired or even violent threats on their lives. And so we have to constantly protect them. And by the way, one thing that we need to teach our cultural and artistic society here in Israel is to learn from the artistic society of the US. Here you don't hear a lot of artists talking about politics. They're really afraid of doing that because, again, it's a small country and they're afraid of losing of people not buying tickets to their shows or losing their campaigns. We need to find better ways of strengthening them and encouraging them to tell the truth and use their enormous power of influencing people and of people listening to them to create a healthy and strong political discussion.
I think we're running, we have around 5 minutes left. I do want to make sure that our attendees are focusing on the campaign, Our Future Israel, that we are really focused on that over the next 2 weeks or so. This is obviously the kickoff. So we have a few other folks that please ask rapid fire questions, and maybe Stav, you can answer in a rapid fire fashion. I think Peter, Brandon, Yuval, Chelsea, if you have time, we'll take your questions really fast.
Mine was answered, so thank you.
Thank you.
Brandon?
Sure, I'll just ask you quickly. I've heard from a lot of folks when I've met with some right-wing leaders in the government there, I've heard that they don't necessarily view American Jews as stakeholders in the larger conversation, particularly about Israel's borders and security in that. So I'm curious kind of how you view the role American Jews play and how Americans can kind of purchase influence and become stakeholders to maybe some of the more right-leaning coalitions in Israel.
It's funny, it reminds, sorry.
I was going to say, maybe we can ask one more and then.
Okay, sure.
Who's asking the question?
Yuval?
Sure. So actually, my question is a bit of an extension to Brandon's question that, yes, American Jews do have a stake in this, but as someone who is also involved in a lot of Christian communities, the role of the American Evangelical Church in the relationship between the US and Israel is also huge. And so I would also be interested to hear, both for American Jews and looking beyond the Jewish community, what can be done moving forward.
Yeah, so I think, thank you. This is, it's a bit funny, we need to explain how important American Jews are when, you know, half of what we talked about was about how the US involvement within Israel is important, and how it affects our lives and our security. I think, well, all of us here will agree that the US is the most important ally that we have. Once, I think a few years ago, President Rivlin said it, that the #1 Israeli security priority is the US, the second priority is the US, and the third priority is the US. That's the Israeli-US relationships are crucial for our security. And in the same way that they are crucial today, the initiative that came from Trump is the one and most important discussion that we have today. And sadly, that initiative is not good for our security. And I think, I'm sure that he did not intend to create a security problem for Israel. And I'm afraid that what Netanyahu is doing and where Netanyahu is leading us now is not in the path that Israelis needs, but in the path that Netanyahu needs. And that's what happens under corruption. When you have so much corruption in government, you never know if the decisions of this government are there, you know, to take care of the people, or if they are there, you know, to take care of that corrupt government. And that's what we're experiencing now. So why are American Jews important for us? First of all, because, again, Israel is supposed to be the capital of Jewish life. It's supposed to be the safe haven for Jews, the place where we all feel, because of its existence, where we all can feel safe. When there is anti-Semitism, when there is fear, when there is racism, this is the place to be always secure for all of us. And Israel has also created the new Israeli culture that's based on the Jewish DNA and is Israeli. And I think that Israeli culture is in many ways very, very close to what most young Americans would see as a great culture, and would discover the strong connections that they have with us. Connection that based on our interest in the young people community, and the way that we see our future and the challenges that we have to solve today. We need your help in order to solve the existing challenges here. We need you to be political when it comes to who puts here money and where this money is going, the money that comes from the US, and what this money has come to serve, and to be active in helping Israel as part of our friendship, as part of our history, to remember what it is. I mean, when I see racist attacks happening globally, not just the ones that are against Jews, but the ones that are against any community, I feel that we have responsibility in making every effort that we can in order to stop it because of our history. It's not a role that we chose, but it's a role that we were taken into or forced into because we know what can happen because of racism. So it's part of our job. And it's part of our job to make sure that the things that we create here will serve the global community, and that our innovation and our ability to find solutions to many, many problems that there are will serve the international community. That's part of our DNA, of our Jewish DNA and of our Israeli DNA. And I think that another huge part of it is the connection that we have with you guys. So the US is already involved, and it's about us together, you and us, to make sure that that involvement is a positive involvement for Israel, and that it stands in line with our values and with the kind of country that we want to be.
I think that's a great place to end the conversation. Wow, that was, very inspiring. And I think just the perfect kickoff to this campaign. I think, there was over 90 people on this webinar, and I know we recorded it, so we'll be able to go back and share it across our networks. For all the Atidniks on the call, we have a few asks of you. Obviously, this campaign, we have short-term goals, but we have a long-term future. But for this campaign, we're asking everyone if you can do one of three things. We posted the form in the chat to fill out. It is adding your voice to the campaign, recording a video and sending to Atid so that we can collect a video representing all our voices. And three, sharing on social media Our Future Israel and other information and links that we send to you and we have collected in a Google Doc. So this is all focused right now on the immediacy of annexation, but obviously these conversations are for the long term. They're about creating, as Stav said, a collaboration and intimate dialogue and collaboration between our millennial Zionist community and our partners in Israel. So with that, I wanted to thank you guys all for joining us today. Thank you, Stav, so much for helping us. Yeah, and we'll continue this relationship, and you know that you can always count on Atid to have your back. So I'll turn it over to Shani to end out this session.
Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you again, Stav, and Brianna and Alex and everybody who shared their thoughts, and Suri, our friend who helped put this all together as well. I just want to remind everyone that Israel Policy Forum does a lot of work around policy and education, especially regarding annexation, but really throughout the year on everything that relates to the Israel-Palestinian issues and the two-state solution. So we're always open to hearing from you, and we are a 501c3, so we're technically like nonpartisan, and we just focus on the policy element of it, which I think is really valuable. So always happy to hear from you all. Thank you. And we'll be sharing more information about how to get involved.
Thank you.
Tweet or tag Our Future Israel in any of your posts or reactions.